Welcome back to Seller Sessions, and in today's podcast, I'm going to be speaking to you guys about NNN agreements. So even if you're a really big seller and you've been sourcing from China for a really, really long time, I still highly recommend that you listen to today's podcast because you may have never had an NNN agreement put in place, or you don't really know what an NNN agreement is, or you've never worked with a lawyer and actually had a proper NNN agreement put in place. So I'm going to be speaking about what an NNN agreement is, why it's important that you do use a lawyer and not just get a downloadable version of it. I'm also going to share with you at what stage of your journey working with a new supplier do you actually ask them for an NNN agreement, and is an NNN agreement always needed every single order? I'm going to talk about that as well. I'm also in the end going to be sharing clauses from an NNN agreement that I had done with my lawyer. That's definitely worth for you guys to listen to. So yeah, without further ado, let's get into it. Okay, so just before we get started, I just want to make sure that you guys remember I am not a lawyer. Nothing that I'm sharing here is legal advice because I'm not a lawyer. Everything that I'm sharing here is from my own experiences. I've been sourcing from China for a very, very long time, and I've dealt with many different types of suppliers and many different types of agreements, and obviously also NNN agreements. Some people may call them IP agreements, etc. At the end, I'm also going to show you an example of one of the agreements in which I have. And of course, if you're interested in actually working with a lawyer, which we'll talk about a little bit later, then feel free to find me anywhere on social, YouTube, whatever it may be. And I'm more than happy to share his details with you. Okay, so let's start with the beginning, which is what is an NNN agreement? So NNN agreements are the Chinese equivalent of an NDA. NDA meaning non-disclosure agreement. An effective NNN agreement is used to help protect your confidentiality when working with manufacturers directly in China. NNN stands for and includes non-disclosure, non-circumvention, and non-use clauses. What's an NNN versus an NDA? So the clauses of an NDA can include the clauses of an NNN. However, they do not always include the same terms. Therefore, you should carefully read any document thoroughly before signing it. NNNs should be used when you're doing business directly with a Chinese company. Not just, there's also other countries, because they hold more legal authority and power in China, and they must also be both in English and Mandarin. So that is basically what an NNN agreement is. It's basically the Chinese version of an NNN, and obviously the most important thing that you want to make sure that it is in both in English and in Chinese. So what does NNN stand for, looking sort of more in depth into it? So the non-use part of that, this clause states that the supplier agrees not to use the confidential information for any purposes other than the intended business relationships. This ensures that they will not utilize the information to compete with you or harm your business. The non-circumvention part. So this clause keeps the supplier that you're working with from basically undercutting you, trying to do business with, or establishing relationships with your customers. So if you're marking up the price of your product, and a supplier might try, let's just say, to sell your product directly to customers, for examples like some suppliers may do on an Amazon level, at a much lower price, this specific clause then prevents that from happening. And that's one of the most important clauses as well. So the importance of this clause varies depending on the situation, but it's an essential safeguard to have in place. And then the non-disclosure. So in the NNN, non-disclosure is similar to the non-disclosure that you may see in a typical NDA agreement. Its purpose is to stop trade secrets and proprietary information from being stolen or made public. The non-disclosure clause should clearly state who is allowed to view and use protected or confidential information within a group or a company. And if there is an infringement made by any member of the group, then the factory that made the disclosure should be made fully liable and should be clearly stated in the NNN. So that's kind of what NNN actually stands for. By the way, My lawyer specifically doesn't really call the IP type of agreements that we have an NNN. He calls it something else. But most of you will know this as an NNN agreement, which is why I'm sticking to calling it that. So one of the first questions I always get is, well, do I need a lawyer? So the answer is you do not have to have a lawyer. Okay, I know that there's many different courses, and also my product research and sourcing course also has a downloadable NNN. But I also explain in there that is just a template that I made from taking different parts of my own NNN agreements that I have had made with my Chinese lawyer, but all the NNN agreements that I have been tailor-made to me and my specific scenario with that specific supplier. So when you're then going and just downloading a template online, it may not be enough for your exact needs. And maybe in the end, when I show you an example of an NNN, you'll understand what I mean. So do you need a lawyer? When it comes to safeguarding my own intellectual property and handling agreements in China, I rely on the expertise of my Chinese-based lawyer. He actively represents my interests during agreement negotiations, providing valuable suggestions to ensure that the agreement meets my requirements. What do I mean by that? My lawyer actually will reach out to the suppliers. He creates the contract exactly to what I need it to be. And he actually reaches out to the suppliers and represents me. And he'll also go back with negotiations, because you may find yourself in a scenario where you've got a specific clause in there, and then the supplier comes back and says, look, this and this clause, I'm going to need you to make a change to, or I'm not willing to agree on this. And then you sometimes need to negotiate. Well, is what the supplier is saying logical? And maybe you can take that clause out. Can you come to some sort of agreement and make some slight changes, etc. That needs to be made both in English and in Mandarin. So you definitely want to have someone who in general understands Chinese, but having an actual lawyer and then putting it in the proper types of terms is definitely something that is important to me anyway. So he creates the agreements to fit my exact needs with that specific supplier. Because also, think about it, if you're taking a, just a template offline or online, or whatever it may be, you may need NNN agreements for different scenarios with different suppliers. And the NNN agreement that you may have had with one type of product with one type of supplier, it may be totally different need with a different type of supplier. So he creates the agreements to fit my exact needs with that specific supplier. He verifies that the correct seals and supplier informations are in place. So in China, they have what is called like a red seal. It's like a red stamp. And he'll make sure that all that information is correct and that it also is the exact seal for that specific supplier, and that all the information is correct, which is something that you and I wouldn't know 100% how to check. It's only stuff that really lawyers and specifically China-based lawyers can do. And then he'll also securely store an original copy, which is something that I love. He will have them sign, me sign, and then he'll keep a copy in his law firm, and then he'll also send me a copy as well. And if the supplier asks for a copy, like a physical copy, he'll send them one too. And then additionally, he'll also will do a thorough background check on the suppliers that I have the NNN agreement with. So not every single Chinese lawyer will do this background check as far as I know. My lawyer specifically does before he actually sends the NNN agreement. He always says, Sharon, do you want me to just do a quick background check and make sure everything's, all right? And I always want him to be able to do that, because there's certain information that he can get access to that maybe I can't. Maybe that supplier has been blacklisted. Maybe that supplier had their assets frozen, or whatever it may be. Certain things that only they can access and that I can't. So with the support of the Chinese-based lawyer, I've got confidence that all the agreements are enforceable in a court of law in China, and it provides that added layer of protection and reassurance. And what I mean by that is I want to make sure if I'm hiring or if I'm using an NNN agreement, I want to make sure it's actually enforceable in China, right? So if you're just taking something, just a random template from online, a lot of the time, if it may not be enforceable in China. So in saying that, you need to remember that an NNN agreement is only as good as your willingness to enforce it. And this is something that you need to think about. So we can get NNN agreements all day long, but if you don't actually have the means to then later, if a supplier does in any way, fuck you over, and you now are interested in suing them, you need to have the money to also do that and also want to actually do that. Now, on an NNN agreement, I'm going to speak about when we actually send an NNN agreement and if at all soon. But something that you need to remember is, yes, when you have a complicated product or you have a patented product or whatever it may be, having an NNN agreement may be important. But are you actually going to enforce it later is something that you need to remember. Same thing with patents, obviously, as well. What if you want to have an NNN agreement made up with the supplier and the supplier says no? This is something that I have come across in the past. And to me, specifically, this is a red flag. Why would they not agree to having an NNN agreement? If I'm open to changing specific clauses because I have the ability to, because I have a lawyer, then why would they say no, right? If they're saying no, then this means that there's some sort of red flag. Maybe they're just saying no because they think I'm going to be a difficult customer, which is already a problem. Maybe they're saying no because they have something to hide, right? I always say, well, I don't always say this if I think about it, but when they do come back and say, hey, Sharon, like there is ABC maybe that, we need to change in the agreement, I'm always open to changes if they make sense. I'll speak to my lawyer and I'll ask him, they're wanting to make or he'll say to me, they're wanting to make these changes, and I'll ask him, is it logical? Like, how can we still protect me? And together we come up with, obviously, that a new agreement or an update or whatever it may be. If I was going through that on my own, I would, with my experience specifically, maybe you could hire like someone who can translate, and then just, you can make the changes yourself, possibly, I don't know, using ChatGPT or something like that. And then getting someone who is fluent in Mandarin to make those changes for you. That's something you could do, but obviously I prefer to work with a lawyer. But if a supplier says no, at the end of the day, to me, that is a red flag. So this is probably the thing that I think would probably be most important to you guys. When do we actually use an NNN agreement? Because not every situation requires the use of the NNN. For instance, if you're taking your product from a catalog and only adding your logo to it, right, then the agreement may not be necessary at all, because at the end of the day, what have you really done here? If you're not really sharing with them any important information that if they were to share it elsewhere, it could really impact you, then why do you need it in the first place? It costs, a good amount of money, so why do it in the first place? It's important to assess the sensitivity of your product and design and then determine whether an NNN agreement is needed. So if you're listening to this on the podcast, I would encourage you to find this video either on my channel or on the Seller Sessions YouTube channel, and see I've made like a little infographic that shows you the situation and then when you would actually send the NNN agreement. So basically we have this infographic here, and what we see on the left hand side is the scenario basically that you may be in. On the right hand side we have when do you actually send the NNN agreement, and then on the left hand side in the situation scenarios, it's at the top it's crucial that you do it as soon as possible, and at the bottom it's not as crucial. And then on the right, it's the earliest as possible, and here it's later or not at all. Let's just say that the scenario is you have a product that is potentially a patentable product, and it could be a utility patent, right? I'm not going to get in depth into patents right now. That will leave for a different video podcast. Okay, but this is something that, doesn't exist, and you can actually get a patent, a utility patent for it. Before you even share with them the specification sheet, you may at that stage already need to actually get the NNN agreement put together. This is sometimes something that I've found a bit difficult, where you're just starting a relationship with a new supplier, and then you say to them, look, I want to send you the actual specification sheet, but I'm going to need you to sign an agreement first. Sometimes it can put them off. If they're a good supplier that has a lot of experience and they're, legit, more often than not, they'll be fine with doing that. Something I have found in the past is I've had a supplier come up to me and say, look, I can sign that I won't share your information, that we won't share your designs, we won't do anything like that. But I don't know what the exact product is yet, and therefore I don't know if I can sign the non-compete on it. And that's when my lawyer comes in and helps me with that specific scenario. But if the scenario is that your product is possibly utility patentable, then even at the RFQ and specification sheet stage, you usually would want to send get an NNN agreement made. Now, there is the option of sending a specification sheet with what we would call a decoy product, which basically would be a product that is very similar to your product, or minor changes to an existing product without giving all the information away. And then you can get the NNN agreement made later. That's also possible, but not on every single product. So that was when your product is utility patentable. You want to send the NNN agreement pretty quick, pretty like early in the relationship building with that supplier, or at least before you send the actual proper specification sheet. So let's just say that the product is design patentable. So these types of products already exist. You're just getting you can get a patent on the design. It can be the same scenario that before you actually send them the specification sheet that you would want to get the NNN agreement created. Sometimes it doesn't make sense and you get that done a little bit later. Okay, but these two would be the scenarios where you want the earliest, the better. The earlier, the better that you can send them the agreement and get them to sign it, the better. Then let's just say you've got a product where it's not patentable, but you've added a very unique feature to it or a very unique design, but it's unpatentable. So that's a product that basically anyone could, if they wanted to, anyone could eventually copy eventually, right? So that is something that's not as, in my opinion, as serious as a product that's actually you may mean to patent or could be patentable. You know, it could be an invention or a major design change or whatever it may be. If it's a unique feature change, etc., you can do it a little bit later. It's up to you whether you get the NNN done after the specification sheet or not. But you could do it if you wanted to a little bit later, like in the sampling stage, for example, and say, hey, like we'd love to move forward, but we're going to need to get an NNN agreement signed. And then the next one is, well, what if you haven't created now some major, feature change or whatever it may be, but instead you've just improved the quality or changed materials, for example. That is something that eventually anyone could really copy you on. Is an NNN agreement crucial at that point? It depends on the scenario. In my opinion, again, everything is my opinion from my own experiences. You could have it done at the samples negotiation or factory audit stage before you actually put through the purchase order. It's always best if you're going to have an agreement done that you do get it done before the purchase order. That is the ideal scenario. But again, if the product is it's really just a small improvement and it's more the quality or the materials, then it is important to get it before the purchase order, but it's not as important to get it, for example, before you send the specification sheet, in my opinion, obviously. And then the last one is, well, what if you haven't made any major change? All you've done is, packaged or bundled different products together. The question then is, do you really need an NNN agreement? Does it make sense to get an NNN agreement put together? And if it does, you could do it after the purchase order. You could do it before. It's up to you. You could also do it after purchase order too. It depends. You're really just taking things that are off the shelf and putting them together. If you're not sharing some crazy or really, really important information with the supplier, it really may not be crucial. And this is why I'm saying that you need it, like the timing of when you ask to get the NNN done really does depend on your product. It depends on your differentiation. It depends if the product is patentable. It depends how much of a differentiation point you do have, right? I can tell you that there's been scenarios where I've already started. So I will never reach out to a supplier for the first time, just on the RFQ scenario, and say, hi, I'm Sharon from this and this company, and we're looking to develop this and this product. But before I move on, I need to send you an NNN. I haven't even built any sort of communication and proper relationship with that supplier yet. Why would they even reply to me and say yes, right? So you need to be smart about when you ask to get the agreement made. And you do want to build some sort of rapport with the supplier at that stage before you actually ask to send that to them. It's difficult for me to give you an exact scenario for that because I feel like it's something you need to go through and to sort of feel when it's the right time to send it through. And if it's not right at the very beginning and you've made a really, really major design change, but you don't feel like you're in a place with that supplier yet where you're comfortable to ask them to sign the agreement, then the decoy product is a really smart way to go, where basically you send them something very, very similar, not the exact product. You make a specification sheet for basically something that's not exactly it. And you'd say, look, and I'm very honest with that. So I say, look, this is not the exact product. It's very, very similar. Once we move forward a little bit more, I will be able to send you the exact specification sheet or whatever it may be. As I'm hearing myself say this, there were some times where I didn't necessarily say that, and then just later I did say, hey, look, what I sent you up to here was not the exact product. I'd now like to send you the exact product, but I'm going to need you to sign an NNN agreement first. I have done that in the past. I don't really do that anymore. I try and be honest, pretty upfront so that they don't get pissed off later. Trust is one of the most important things, and building that sort of relationship with your supplier. It's something that's really, really important. So this is the basics of when do you actually get the NNN agreement done, and if at all. Not every single time do you need an NNN agreement. Not every single time does it make sense, right? If all I've done is taken a cup and just put my logo on it, I haven't done anything really, really major, right? And getting an NNN agreement in place would probably just be a waste of time, waste of energy, waste of money, and really not necessarily necessary. So I hope that this infographic kind of helps you to understand what the scenario is, and then at what stage do you then actually approach them for getting that NNN agreement created. So I'm going to show you guys an example of an agreement that I have. Again, you need to remember that what I'm going to show you is an agreement that I had, that I just took the information out and just changed it for the sake of showing you guys here, that for a product that did have a mold. So we also speak about the mold there. And it was a very complicated type of product as well. We asked to get that NNN agreement put together very, very quickly, we asked to get that NNN agreement signed by the supplier really early on in the stage, because the product we did file for a design patent on it, and because it's a product that has a lot of tooling and molds and a lot that goes into that specific product, it was necessary for us to get an NNN agreement quite quickly. So this may be a little bit more complicated than a typical NNN agreement, but this is the one that I pulled out to share with you guys. So I'm going to show you guys that now. Okay, so this is an example, and before I get into it, I just want to say this is a very heavy IP protection or NNN agreement. This is one where the product was expensive, very expensive. We had molds here for the products that were also very expensive. And this was, like, when I say heavy, I mean it's an over-the-top example. And I've purposely showing you this so that you can understand that it is important that you have an NNN agreement in place for your specific scenario. There are certain things that you'll see here that you're not going to need, right? So my lawyer doesn't call these NNN agreements. He calls them IP protection and confidentiality agreements. At the very top, it'll have who is party A, what's the company name and their address, who is party B. Then when we get into the first article, it talks about the intellectual property. So party A has full intellectual property over the designs of, and then brand names, products, including the design provided by party A and the design changes made for mass production, even participated in the work of design changes, party B does not have any rights over the design of products. This is an important clause because sometimes you may provide, let's just say, a CAD or a design to a supplier, and then they or their team makes changes to it, and then they could go back and say, well, we also co-own this product, or we can sell this product because our engineer or our designer made changes to it. So this clause basically, again, I'm not a lawyer, but from my understanding, from being in these scenarios as a buyer, meaning I'm a buyer of the supplier, and working with my lawyers on this, from my understanding, that then covers that, which is something that's important. There are more clauses here. I'm going to leave it for now. This is really just for you guys to get a gist of how this could look. So confidential information. Party A may disclose certain of the confidential information to Party B. Confidential information shall include, without limitation, all proposals of design, IP, data, formulas, processes, designs, etc. And then we've got the non-disclosure, which is also talking about confidential information and the fact that they cannot disclose, publish, or anything like that, any of the information that we provide them. Then it goes into modification and development, something that not everyone may have. Any modification or development to Party A's confidential information or intellectual property shall still belong to Party A, no matter such modification or development that are made by Party B or Party A. So like I said earlier, and this just goes more in depth into it, if your supplier has gone in and made or helped you with modifications to your original design, you don't want them to be able to come back and say, oh, well, wait a minute, I co-own this, or whatever it may be. Then it gets into protection on Party A's confidential information and intellectual property. Party B shall not register any of Party A's confidential information or intellectual property, including but not limited to patents, trademarks, or copyright. So this is basically if they know that you hold copyrights or trademarks, whatever it may be, they're not allowed to go and register that as well, etc. There's more stuff there. Non-use, so Party B shall hold and maintain the above mentioned confidential information in strict confidence by the sole and exclusive benefit of Party A, etc. Then, and by the way, everything obviously has everything in English, and then under that, it's got the exact same clauses in Mandarin. Technology, design, development. So any new design or IP which is developed from brand names, products, design, file shall belong to Party A. That's getting into the development and designs and saying again that we own it. Then ownership of the mold. So this had a really expensive mold. Party A agrees to engage Party B in making molds for producing and then brand names products. Party B acknowledges that these molds are the exclusive property of Party A. This is something that's really important. If you have this is important if you have a very expensive mold. If you just if you're just doing a private label product, you haven't really made such a big change. But the reason you need the mold is because of just there's a slight little design change, but really anyone could go and copy you or whatever it may be, and you decide that you don't really want an NNN agreement. It's not a big deal. But if you have a really expensive mold, whether it's an NNN agreement or you could put this into what is also called a general conditions and purchase order agreement, and it's not a per purchase order, it's a general conditions and purchase order agreement. You could also put the ownerships of mold into that. It doesn't necessarily have to be in an NNN agreement. It's a different type of agreement. Not going to get into that one right now. And then the restriction on use of the mold and confidential obligation, there's a whole clause on that. The marks of the mold, so that you can have a mark affixed to the mold, and also talking about that. Safekeeping and maintenance of the mold. Okay, not everyone's going to agree to the specific clause. Party B shall provide a mold status report to Party A each quarter. This is something that my lawyer put in that I would have never even thought about. I think the supplier did agree to this part from my memory. Not every supplier may agree to it. Next is relocation and return of the mold. This is something that a lot of the time people don't think about, but let's just say that the supplier is, you're working with them, and you then decide to try and work with a different supplier, for example, and you want them to send the mold to the supplier. You own that mold, and they need to agree to that. So Party A may at any time request Party B to return its mold or relocate it to any third party designated by Party A. This is also one that is important. Then the next one is a destruction of the mold. So maybe you no longer sell this product, but you want to make sure that they destroy the mold and that no one else can sell it. So there's also that. Non-competition, about how they can't complete. And then we have supply. So for example, here it'll say without written approval of party A, party B may not sell or supply and then brand name products, etc. And then there's also non-circumvention here, the obligation of subcontractors. Sometimes you're working with a supplier, especially just after Chinese New Year, you may be working with a supplier and they may take an order from you and they'll actually subcontract out to someone else. You need to know about that, or you may not agree to that. So that's also in here. And then parties bound just talks about who the parties bounds are. And then what happens if there's a breach of agreement. In this specific scenario, this was an expensive product. A lot of money went into this. And the breach of contract amount that the lawyer suggested was $60,000. I can already say that the supplier did not agree to that. And we then had a second one drafted, which was for less. I can't remember because it's from a couple of years ago. So this is why it's also important for you to be able to have a lawyer to help you, because if you need to go back and then make changes to that, it's easier when you have a lawyer that represents you and then he's the one negotiating, and it kind of takes away the bad feelings that could be involved in it or whatever it may be. You can always just put it on your lawyer and say, look, this is what he's saying or whatever it may be. So that's that as well. And then governing law and contract language. This is extremely important. This has to be in every NNN agreement that you have. The agreement shall be governed by the laws of PR China, People's Republic of China, etc. And it also says that it's both in English and Chinese. And then the agreement, it shows basically the area for you to sign. And then it shows the area for them to sign, where it also asks for their Chinese name, their English name, and their company seal and lots of other stuff. But that is just an example of what an IP or an NNN agreement could look like. Again, this is a really heavy one. There's a lot of stuff that the average seller or the average person would not need to have in there. But I specifically wanted to show you guys this or read this out to you guys. And I honestly just read out parts of it. If you're listening to this on the podcast, I did not go in depth into it, just so you can understand certain things that you may need. But they're, for your specific need, you may need more clauses, or you may not need half the clauses, whatever it may be. And that's why it's really, really important that you have an NNN agreement made for your specific scenario. Okay, so I hope that this was helpful to you guys. If you would like to reach out to me, you can find me on Facebook, Sharon Evan, on Official Sharon Evan. You can find me on Instagram, Official Sharon Evan. You're welcome to join my Facebook group, Amazon FBA Alphas Brand Building Domination. If you are interested in one-on-one coaching or having me help you develop your products or any Amazon related stuff or sourcing, whatever it may be, SharonEvan.com is my website. And until next time, guys.